Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Episode 2, Season 1, Episode 2 of The Medical Show. I'm Scott Johnson, a podcaster and a dork. And, of course, we have Dr. Gerry Tolbert, a doctor, a podcaster, and a dork. You have dork-like things.
Good afternoon.
Right? You have,
Yes,
you have dorky tendencies. He likes the board games. He's a video game guy. You know, this is why he and I get along so well. It's just we have this gap of knowledge on the medical side, you know?
I've got all of the dorky stuff behind me here that is one of my dorky bookshelves.
Nothing wrong with that. You gotta have your good stuff close and your friends closer, or something like that. I don't know how the old phrase goes. Anyway, we're back, everybody. Thanks for all your great feedback, everybody, for our first episode. I think that went really well, and I've been hearing nothing but good things. I hope that it helped you understand what the point of the show will be moving forward, and gave you a good idea of what to expect. Before we get into today's big topic, which we'll start with an email, or a text rather. Was it an email or text? I don't remember. However we got this, some way or another. That'll launch us into what we're going to discuss today. Before we do that, though, I just got back from Las Vegas, Nevada. Okay, this is the home of, you know, bad air and, I don't know, a good time, right? Actually, it wasn't that bad. The wind was blowing and it kind of kept it clean. But anyway, we were there for a concert and went and saw Deadmau5 live. And part of this concert was a little bit weird because I was approached by two separate people asking me for, one guy asked me for Molly, the other person asked me for poppers. And somebody told me these are two very popular go to the EDM concert and listen to it drugs.
Party drugs, as it were.
Yes. Yeah, party drugs. And I was curious because there was a bunch of back and forth about this with friends and then on our morning show and some other stuff about what these actually are. Is Molly and ecstasy, are they best friends? Are they the same thing? Or just what are those two things? And what do they do to the human body?
They're two names for the same thing. And I actually pulled it up so I don't butcher the pronunciation here. It's methylene dioxymethamphetamine. So that's what MDMA means, and that's what it's abbreviation for. And that is ecstasy or Molly, but MDMA, the methamphetamine derivative, is the drug. And it is a stimulant. Yep. It is just like taking Adderall or any of the other amphetamine salts that we use for ADHD. So It does increase concentration and focus. It also has some psychogenic properties because of that add-on group that's in front of the amphetamine, and so it can cause some tripping, as it were.
Yeah.
But it is very well known for causing feelings of euphoria, feeling really good, and also feelings of love and connection. So a lot of the things that you think about with family or friends that are very close, it stimulates the part of the brain that secretes the hormones that kind of control those feelings.
Okay. That explains the guy next to me who was very huggy. It was all very touchy and he was very nice, but overly, like the kind of nice that I don't think exists in normal polite company. It was a little heightened nice, I guess I could say it. And then poppers, I guess, are this quick fix 3-minute high thing where you just snort it out of a little bottle or can. I don't know if it's even legal in places.
In a lot of places it isn't. Yeah. It's a drug called amyl nitrate. And it is a vasodilator that expands a lot of the blood vessels, and it can be used for a lot of different stuff. But it is typically used in an emergency setting, but to treat actually chest pain, angina.
Oh, really? So if I'm out, that's interesting. I'm in a line at Disneyland, right? Clutch my chest. Oh, it's finally happening. Quick, get me a popper. Is that something I could do?
Kinda, yeah. I don't know that I would because you don't know the provenance of that popper or where it came from. Some of those also contain nitrites, not just nitrates, and they can be an issue. But yeah, if anybody watched The Pit, there was actually a discussion about poppers. The kid that came in blue, there was a question about whether or not he may have overdosed on poppers.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's where that came up. Oh, I was racking my brain the whole weekend going, I know I've heard of these. I couldn't think of where. Of course you'd freaking know. Well, anyway, it was a lot of fun, and these things got bandied around. I am not a user or partaker of said things, so I'm not interested in any of this at all, other than I was curious what their properties were. And so when you put the meth word in there as part of the MDMA, I thought, oh, wait, this is just like straight up meth? But that's not true. There's
It has a lot of the same side effects if you take enough of it. So it's still going to cause racing heartbeats and high blood pressure and other things that you have to be very, very careful of. This is not, we will come out and say directly, we do not endorse or encourage any use of illicit substances without the express written consent of the person taking them. Insert your joke here about how we're not saying how to do it or what to do, but
Yeah.
But in general, those types of medications are still medicines, and the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose. If you take too much of anything, it can cause some pretty serious problems. So you just have to be, under good supervision and doing things in a very careful manner if you're going to encourage or imbibe anything. Again, if you're not prescribed something by a doctor, if you have conditions, especially heart conditions or other things that could put you at risk of developing side effects or problems, don't use those substances without consulting somebody that knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. Talk to your doctor. Also, just maybe don't do them.
Yeah.
Have fun without them. How about that? No judgment, whatever. People do what you're going to do, but I kind of wanted to remember my night. Maybe that's not a problem with memory. I don't know how it works. So I don't want to make stuff up here, but I just want to experience it raw.
That's more person specific, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends. Has anybody, this is total thing, you can just tell me to shut up and we move on, but I got to ask you this. Has anybody ever come in your office loaded on like Molly and said, it's something wrong, I don't know what happened, maybe they got, somebody put it in their drink or whatever? Have you ever had to deal with like a real time, this person is stoned out of their mind kind of thing during your 20 years of experience?
Not in the office.
Okay.
But when I was working in the ER as a resident, we could moonlight in the ER. It was something that we could do in the evenings or on off days if we wanted to as upper level residents.
Yeah.
And saw a lot of drug use in our part of South Carolina. There were quite a few folks that had issues.
Goodness gracious. All right. Well, see, you never know until you ask. All right. We're going to get to the meat of today's discussion, and we're going to wait no more to get to it. We're going to start it with this email that we got. We'll keep this person anonymous. Says, hi, Scott and Doc. That's you, obviously. I have seen and heard on social media and podcasts that any weight is healthy. I know that this is part of the body positive movement, but I'm not interested in the politics of it all. Is it true and backed by science, or is it unhealthy to be overweight? Thanks for the show, bros, says this guy. Or lady, I don't know, actually. So, Gerry, that's an interesting starting point for the discussion about weight loss, the myths around it, the prevention, the meds we're using today, which are, there's a lot of talk about Ozempic and Wegovy and all these like newer attempts to sort of curb weight loss, among other ailments. But to just give him an answer to that question, to me, it seems obvious that too much fat ain't no good for a lot of things. Your muscles, your structure, your blood flow, not to mention the potential for diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, all that other stuff. But maybe it's not that obvious. So what do you say to a question like that?
The answer is complex, like everything else we talk about.
Everything else, yep.
But the simple answer is kind of. It is kind of backed by science that you can be overweight and still be healthy. And the problem with the statement and the question is the definition of the word healthy. And you're going to hear me say this probably every single episode. In fact, we may have a dedicated episode to this concept in the coming weeks. The words that we use have so many meanings sometimes that they have no meaning. So when I say the word healthy, you're going to get 50 people that have 50 different ideas about what the word healthy actually means.
I had never thought of that before. We have spread that like butter on too much bread.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so because of that, to answer the question, in some contexts, you can be overweight and still have no problems that are going to cause you life-threatening illness. You can have normal cholesterol, normal blood sugar, even being overweight. Does the behavior that leads to being overweight also lead to risk of other problems? Absolutely. So that's another definition that we have to make sure that we're putting out there. Overweight is a relative term. We're looking at how much do we think that you should be based on your height and other factors. But obesity itself is a specific target, and overweight too, by definition medically, that we determine by something called a BMI or a body mass index. And all that is a calculation that lets us normalize, and that just means make them so that you can compare them weights and heights. So if somebody is 4 feet tall and they weigh 200 pounds, that's a lot different than somebody that is 6 feet tall that weighs 200 pounds.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So we use BMI to be able to look at those numbers as a single number and then compare them to each other.
Gotcha. That's an interesting point, because every single body, not just every body type, but all
Everybody
bodies
has every body.
Yeah, every body has every different body, and those bodies are all going to be slightly different. Even if you take a couple of twins, adult twins, you're going to find a difference between those two in their adulthood that isn't exact anymore about their metabolism, their height, their weight, their whatever. That I didn't realize that encompassed all of that. That's an interesting comparison.
So this is a perfect place for this quote. In physics, if you do an experiment and you get the same result 3 times, then you're probably looking at a law of the universe. Gravity, momentum, you name your thing.
Yeah.
In biology, if you do an experiment and you get the exact same answer 3 times, you're probably working with broken equipment.
Oh, interesting.
Because none of us are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And that's why we use ranges when we talk about medicines, when we talk about weight, when we talk about blood pressure, when we talk about any of the markers that we're using to perform diagnostics. We're not talking about exact numbers. We are talking about ranges most of the time. And so there is a healthy range of weight for each individual person that also is going to be based on how well they are controlling their blood sugar, how well they are controlling their blood pressure, how well they are controlling their cholesterol, the other downstream effects.
Right.
There are also weights that could potentially cause problems with, like you mentioned, things like arthritis in the hips and the knees and the ankles, because you're putting a lot of weight and force through those joints as you move around if you are overweight or obese. Those words are not dirty words. Overweight and obese, they're designations. It's like saying somebody has red hair or blue eyes. They are just a description of that single number, that BMI number we're talking about. And is it inside the threshold, inside the range, or is it outside the range? That's all we're talking about.
Okay, so that's the social implications aside, because there's a bunch. And I also understand, by the way, referring to this person's email, this concept of wanting to have a body positive movement.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's good in general for people to not discriminate based on body type or what their face looks like or any of these things. And certainly, obvious stuff like race and gender. I mean, that to me, those are givens. This other stuff, a little bit more, there's more minutia there, but all of it, I think, deserves a good positive take. I don't think that it's counter to that to also then say, risks are higher for these health problems or these other issues if you are overweight based on your height, your age, or whatever. So I think that's an important thing to at least bring up, because I feel like you said, these aren't dirty words. I think some people use them that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't Gerry and I saying go around and call people fat to their face at Walmart. It's not what we mean. You know what I mean? But
and in polite conversation, calling somebody obese may be considered an insult, but in the doctor's office, that word is not meant as an insult. And that's where we get into trouble. It's that same definition thing we talked about with the word health. How one person defines that word and how another person defines that word when they're having a conversation becomes incredibly important.
Right. So let's dive into this concept of misconceptions. There are a lot of them. And there are a lot of fad diets. There always have been. This isn't anything new. My parents were into something called, I forgot the name. It was some weird diet in the 80s that was supposed to be the end all be all. And then I remember in the 90s, the Atkins thing happened and it was just eat meat all day. And then the Atkins guy died and everyone said, he died of a heart attack. And really he was just old and hit his head on the cement or something like that.
Yep, he did. He had a head injury. That's exactly right.
Yeah, but you know how these things start and they blossom and bloom. And so there's a lot of like information, misinformation, tweaked information, slightly off information out there about all this stuff. And how we actually understand our own metabolisms, I think it's kind of a mess. I don't think anybody's people are informed and malinformed in equal measure a little bit in our modern
Well, let's
time.
start with that word metabolism.
All right.
Because that word gets so many people into so much trouble. This is not going to be a controversial take from a science standpoint, but from a community standpoint, and especially from a pop culture standpoint and a trying to sell you stuff standpoint, there is no such thing as metabolism. It is not one thing. So when you say my metabolism is whatever, scientifically speaking, that's an inaccurate statement. because metabolism is made up of two different components, what we call anabolism, or building up, and catabolism, or breaking down.
Oh my gosh.
And there are
this is already super new to me, but keep going.
And there are already billions of processes that are happening every second to do both building and breaking down. And what we, in effect, what we did was we tried to simplify all of that down by way of explanation to call it all metabolism. But that collective word has been used and abused all over the last several decades to talk about things like being overweight, or to sell diet plans, or to sell you on exercise memberships to gyms or things like that.
It sounds like a fancy medical word. You know what I mean?
That is how most of these misconceptions get started. It sounds sciencey, like the word sinus. It doesn't mean a disease process. It is a hole in a bone in the context that we normally use it.
Yeah. But
it has 5 letters, 2 syllables. It's easy to spell. It's easy to say, and it looks really sciencey on a poster rather than saying nose.
Right. That's boring. Saying nose is very boring to say that.
It sounds childish, and that's the problem, is that we have all of these misconceptions about what a word really means, medically speaking, and we try to define things fairly consistently in medicine. Like I talked about with the anatomy stuff in the last episode, we learn a whole new language, but it's a shared language. So when I say obesity or I say metabolism, most doctors should and hopefully do understand what I mean, scientifically speaking.
Okay.
So that's the first myth that we've got to bust. There's no such thing as metabolism. It is not a one thing kind of thing. The good news is it is still an easy thing when we talk about weight, because weight is a physics problem. Now, bear with me because this may be a little long-winded. I'll try to keep it as short as I can, but I give this lecture several times a day, so I have it pretty well dialed in.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
So, back in the 1930s, Albert Einstein, relativity, E equals mc squared, right?
Yep.
So everybody's heard that, everybody's seen that.
Pretty well established. It's been out there for a while. We're good with it.
It's a pretty solid thing right now as far as we understand physics. E is energy, m is mass, c is the speed of light. So energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. In our corner of the galaxy, the speed of light is a constant. It doesn't really change. Just bear with me. For the physicists in the audience, that's not going to be true, and I understand that. But as far as healthcare providers are concerned, it's a constant. And that means that if you take that term out of the equation, E equals m. For some amount of energy, there is an equivalent amount of mass. Mm-hmm. That is what current theory and science are based on when it comes to weight and how we talk about food and how we talk about diet. Because we talk about calories. A kilocalorie is a unit of energy. It is not a unit of mass. It is not a unit of what makes you up. It is the amount of energy required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius.
Right.
So it is energy. But your mass, your weight, which is mass times gravity, and again, gravity is a constant, so you can kind of ignore it. So we kind of say that they're the same here on Earth, at least. And so your mass is how much of you there is. So there's a certain amount of energy that is required to maintain how much of you there is. And we call that your basal metabolic rate. So there's that metabolism word again. That's why there's a lot of confusion here.
And I like basil. Basil's good. I put it on pizza, whatever. I get it.
Wrong basil.
Oh, okay, good.
B-A-S-A-L, not B-A-S-I-L.
Okay.
And so if you're searching for it, a lot of times it's just shortened to BMR.
Okay.
And so the BMR, the basal metabolic rate, is the amount of energy it takes to maintain how much of you there is consistently across essentially 24 hours. So it's a per day rate most of the time.
Okay.
I did mine earlier. That's why I was just pulling up this website behind me here. At a 45-year-old male, that's me, 6 feet 3 inches tall, 265 pounds. My basal metabolic rate is 2,173 calories per day.
Okay.
So essentially, if I consume 2,173 calories over the course of a day, I will maintain the exact same weight that I had today. And if I'm doing that on average across a week, my weight will relatively be stable. It is not going to shift up or down too far. Now, this is another myth that we can bust in the context of the discussion.
Sure.
People talk about a scale, and you get on the scale, and I'm up 2 pounds or I'm down 2 pounds. Scales don't move in 2s. Scales move in 10s. And so if you haven't changed by 10 pounds, you haven't really changed, because how much of you there is not what the scale is measuring. The scale is measuring how much of you and how much of things inside of you there is. So if you drink a glass of water...
Yeah, like right now I could drink this,
Let me get my big cup here.
I got a glass, sure.
Yeah, so this big cup, so let's say that it's 24 ounces of water. That's going to weigh roughly 1.5 pounds. So if I get on the scale and I take my measurement of my weight and I write it down, and then I get off the scale and I drink that water and I get back on the scale, I will have gained 1.5 pounds. Well, did I really gain 1.5 pounds? No, I just drank 1.5 pounds of water.
I mean, technically you gained it in the sense that you drank 1.5 pounds of water and now it's
right.
with you, temporarily with you, or even permanently as it does its job and eventually you pee it out. But you're right. It's not, I never thought of it that way. When I check my weight and I go, oh my gosh, 2 pounds over last week. What am I doing wrong? Probably nothing.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
And so when we talk about a healthy relationship with weight, that's one of the most important pieces. You can't get lost in just the scale or any of those other things that are going to cause you a lot of undue stress.
Yeah.
Is probably the best word for it.
Sure. Or discourage you, because part of the problem with good old fashioned dieting, which is perhaps counting your calories, keeping you within that 2,100 calories you mentioned, doing your best to be exercising, to eating well, all of those things, that can get really frustrating because it's slow to see results. And if you're putting things in front of you like, oh my gosh, 2 pounds over 4 days ago, what have I done wrong? You've just created an obstacle that actually isn't there.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And when I say you, I mean me, people. I've been doing this.
Well, all of us. We've all done it at one time or another because culturally that's what's become the norm.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. We want people to have a healthy relationship with food and with the things that we're talking about. We don't want people to be so focused on their weight that they get distracted or discouraged from the things that are important.
Right.
If you're doing a good job of maintaining your blood sugar and cholesterol and blood pressure, and some of those are diet based and some of those have other factors that affect them, but in terms of having a healthy relationship with food, we have to eat. We don't have a choice. I mentioned last episode, when you try to put a person in a room, you mentioned putting a person in a room full of heroin and just turning them loose, an addict. The same thing is true if you take somebody who has an unhealthy relationship with food and put them in a pantry, right? It's the same idea, but we have to have food. We don't have to have heroin.
That's a good point.
And so we have to learn how to have that healthy relationship. And that's where these myths that are so prevalent in our culture, that's where they cause so much damage and so much harm.
So when I walk into a room and there's a sleeve of Oreos just staring at me, and I'm like, I really want to avoid these, but I don't. Are you saying that it's not as big a sign of personal weakness that I assign to it? You're saying this is obviously a different question. We'll get to addiction episodes at some point.
Sure, absolutely.
But what I'm taking from you, and maybe I shouldn't be, is that if I didn't avoid them and I grabbed two of them, that wasn't as much me as it was the situation I freaking found myself in. Do you know what I mean?
Partly, yeah. So what happens, and this is a whole other tangent, but it's a good one. We have to separate calories and weight from dopaminergic pleasure. Right? That feel-good dopamine rush that we get from doing things. And that's the problem with food, is that it contains both. When we are talking about eating, we're talking about getting calories to maintain our mass, how much of us there is, but we're also talking about getting dopamine because food is a cultural hallmark. It is a cultural... We have put so much power behind food. How do we celebrate birthdays? How do we celebrate holidays? How do we celebrate everything? You get a new job, you get a cake, you get a cookie, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So we have put so much cultural baggage on food, as well as it being this thing that helps keep us alive. We haven't put that cultural baggage on water.
No.
We have to have water to stay alive, but we don't use it to celebrate. I mean, I guess that's probably a bad analogy because we do spray water into the air for different things. But
a little bit, but mostly we're spraying like champagne and booze, exactly. or it's special drinks, or who brought the big giant thing of soda or whatever for the party. No one's going, I hope we have a lot of water at this party. No one ever does that.
Yep.
That's wild. So when Janice from accounting retires and we have a giant cake for her, that's part of this culture that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And we just normalize that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with culture, but when it starts to interfere with the science part of things, that's where we get into trouble. It's the Fred Flintstone, George Jetson problem that we talked about last time.
Right. Now, if it's even possible to do this, can we answer this question? How much of a person's ability to lose weight is determined by genetics versus lifestyle choices? And there's a lot of argument about that. Nurture, nature. Some people are born just a little thicker or whatever.
Yeah,
some people
absolutely.
aren't. Like I spent most of my young life as a skinny as a rail, weighed nothing, 110 pounds in high school kind of kid, 6'3", just ridiculous looking. And then it all caught up with me. So now I'm a very different kind of body that I didn't have then. And and now, and that's confusing at first, because I was like, wait a minute, I thought I was going to be just skinny the rest of my life. And now I'm like, no, you're putting on, some meat you probably didn't want to have. So how much of that ability for me to recognize either a problem or a desire to get fitter or whatever it is, how much of that is genetics versus lifestyle?
It is more lifestyle than genetic, but genetics play a role. Let's put it that way.
All right.
Because genetics will determine things like your height. And we were talking earlier about the BMI, remember? And even just this calculation of BMR, the basal metabolic rate. Your height is part of that calculation.
Right.
You don't get to decide how tall you are.
No, I did not.
So somebody who is 6 feet tall and weighs 180 pounds and is trying to lose 20 pounds versus somebody who is 4 feet tall and weighs 180 pounds and is trying to lose 20 pounds has a very different energy requirement to do that. Because there is a certain amount of you that is based on your height and your weight.
And that includes muscles and
everything.
Everything.
It's everything.
Right.
We include it all. And so we bake it into the calculation.
So if a person who's 4 foot and is 200 pounds and wants to lose 20 pounds, that's harder for them because the kit is smaller, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they have to shrink down their intake by a much larger amount. They can't take in nearly as much as somebody who is 6 feet tall and still stay the same. So my basal energy expenditure, we talked about that a second ago, it's about 2,200 calories. If my wife weighed as much as I do, she doesn't. She definitely doesn't come close. But if she did and she was trying to lose weight, she would be eating 1,300 calories a day.
To counter it.
Because of her height.
Right.
I, to lose weight, only need to eat 1,800 calories a day. That's 500 more calories a day. That's a whole meal from some places.
Sure. Yeah.
So the difference there, that's why when people say, oh, well, you can lose it so much easier, or you can lose it so much, it's more difficult for you, or I can't do this because of X, Y, or Z, or my husband loses his weight very easily and I lose my weight it's very difficult for me to lose weight. That happens because of those differences. So yes, does genetics play a part in it? Absolutely. But we figure that into these calculations when we're doing them to get you a better idea of what you actually need.
Right. Because I've got friends. Oh, you know what's funny? Just you saying what you just said made my brain do the thing that we're talking about, which is you said add 500 calories to that, which is like another meal somewhere.
Yeah.
And my brain went, yeah, you could get a whole other 500 calories and still be on your diet. Like this is the problem. Our brains want to curve it and push it to what we want more than what we perhaps need. And it's automatic. Like you weren't even talking about me, and all I could think of was like, I could squeeze another 500 in. Well, what? Why?
That's
right?
a few Oreos.
Yeah, that's a few Oreos. It's at least it's about half a sleeve. It's not too bad. But I'm not going to do it. Damn it! I'm learning too much here to just go and blow it right after the show. You've got like the science versus personality. Science versus personal responsibility thing. A lot of people are like, you're huge because of the way you live. You just need to pull up your bootstraps and brah. So I want to address that.
So how often do you think about tying your shoes?
Very rarely. Even when I'm doing them, I don't really think about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are lots of things that our brains, we can put it on autopilot and just do it. We don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And that comes from repeated behavior.
Right.
So our behavior sets the tone, and then our brain says, what's the least energetic thing I can do? What is the laziest thing? All of our human brains, we want to conserve sugar, and so to do that, we do the least energetic thing that we can. And so that means putting things on autopilot. That's what I call it. And I'm not the only one that calls it that, but just the idea that a habit is just your brain saying, how can I get to the point from point A to point B without having to think about it?
Right.
That is the personal responsibility side of this. It's not about willpower. There's no such thing as willpower. That's a made-up concept. That everything is a made-up concept that we've all agreed on. That if we go down that rabbit hole, it's a long one. But
right.
The idea of willpower is something that was popularized not that long ago, and it is a dangerous concept. It's something that we have to be very careful of. There are things that we do, every single one of us as humans, that are the easiest option. And if we don't make eating in a way that fuels our body and fuels our mind and gives us pleasure, but also doesn't cause us damage, If we don't make that the easiest option, then we're going to do whatever is the easiest option.
I see. So if you're used to ordering your food, DoorDash brings it every time. It's not great food because you don't want to spend a fortune and you just don't want to go to the grocery store and make this stuff yourself. Because that's the habit. It is now the path of least resistance for you.
And so it's a choice without a choice. It's kind of like smoking. I use this direct analogy because it's very valid.
Yeah.
When we talk about smoking and we talk about food, there is an automatic, I need something, so I'm going to go down this pathway to get it.
Yeah.
And that's true for dopamine. It's true for whatever else that we're feeling. And there's a lot of misconception about what hungry actually feels like. Because in the developed world, it's actually quite rare to be truly hungry.
Yeah. Like hunger,
And that's a concept
like real hunger is I've never had it. I've never had it.
Exactly.
I mean,
I have.
Yeah.
But it's usually after like exercise or something where you're burning a lot of calories and you have this, you haven't eaten for a little while, even if it's 8, 12 hours. True hunger can kick in at that point for sure. But your stomach growling is not being hungry. That's another myth that we can bust along the way here.
So when I was in Vegas, we were out till about 3:30 at that concert. And I didn't eat anything from, I think, 6 p.m. forward. And so it was a good long time. We're moving around, dancing, getting real sweaty, just super energetic time at the thing. And at the end, we were like, should we go get something to eat? It's like 3:30 in the morning. And I'm like, it seems like a bad idea. Let's go back and go to sleep, which I did because I'm old and lame. And I do that. And then the next morning we get up and we're like, all right, we got to get breakfast. And man, did that sound good. I was just like, And it felt like a moment of true, I'm hungry versus what I usually ascribe to hunger, which is just this weird draw of, I could eat that again. I already did, but I'll do it again. It's hard to define what hunger is in the first place.
Absolutely.
Like everyone ever, I don't know if anyone's ever asked themselves this, but think to yourself, how would you describe hunger? That's hard. Like what? It's not. It doesn't have like parts and pieces. It's just a weird thing that we've all agreed that we are when we don't have enough food, but we don't know how to describe it. It's very weird.
Absolutely. And that's why the discussion is so difficult, because for each person, it may be that you're associating it with different things. And that's where it gets complex. So yeah, the idea that personal responsibility plays a role, absolutely. Nobody lights a cigarette for you, puts it in your mouth, and then squeezes you in and out to make you smoke it, right? The same thing is true about food. Very few times. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, but people aren't just shoving food in your mouth and then moving your jaw up and down to make you eat it.
Yeah. Well, not with that attitude anyway, but yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, so we're choosing to do it. That's fine. And any choice we make is a choice. There's no good, there's no bad. It is a choice. And inherent in that choice is this idea that there are consequences to that choice, right? And that's a whole kind of philosophical argument about this, but it is the key to understanding what's actually happening.
Right.
We are making a choice to put that food in our mouths. We're making that choice to take in those extra calories. And we may be doing it without really thinking about it hard. We have put ourselves on autopilot and we do it. And that can lead to unhealthy outcomes. There, in turn, if you've set up systems around you, so the food that you have in the house, you know how many calories are in it, or you know how many calories you've had for that day, and you say, I can have this, it is safe for me to eat, and I think I want it, and then you eat it, that's fine. There is nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
So having a piece of cake when you've only had your 1,800 calories out of your 2,100, that's fine. Have your piece of cake. But you want to make sure that you're not doing that thoughtlessly. It needs to have some level of thought behind it so that you understand what you're doing.
Back to the shoelace thing. I've done this where I will get a bag of something and watch a movie. Popcorn is this in theaters, right? Where I'll just sit there and mindlessly eat that popcorn when I know that's like the worst butter. The popcorn's not even that good. I'm not hungry. I had dinner before we got here. Why am I doing this? And there's a few things at play. One is it's mindless, like you said. Path of least resistance is just a thing you can do. If it's a stressful movie, it's almost like a way of dealing with that because you're
absolutely,
it's a repetitive thing. And on top of all of that, you've made a cultural point of it. We go to the movies, we get popcorn.
Yep.
It's no longer just, are you hungry for anything? We could buy this popcorn they have on display. We go there because we're like, yeah, movie theater popcorn. It's a tradition. We've been doing it since the 20s, man. Woo, popcorn. And I never thought of it that way until today.
Yep. Well, there you go.
Which is what I hope some of you at home are doing. When people get presented with a fad diet and they go, this thing I'm on, it's called the Larry Turnbach one berry a day diet or whatever. I made that all up, so I don't want to. I'm trying not to besmirch any particular, organizations or anything. But when somebody comes along something like that, or comes across a diet that seems very flash in the pan, very out of nowhere, if you could give them advice about what mindset to be in when they see these things, I always talk about trying to remain skeptical, always have a critical mind about anything that's going on. Forget about just food, but just life. I guess it's the same here. What kind of questions should they ask themselves about this fad diet?
Absolutely. The first question should be, what is it going to do for my calories?
Right.
Because that is the thing that determines what our weight does. So essentially, we kind of got sidetracked here, but to come back to that idea of how scientifically weight works, that amount of calories that we need, that basal metabolic rate, if you go above about 300 below that, you start losing about a half a pound to 2 pounds a week. If you go about 300 calories above that, on average, you go about a half a pound to 2 pounds a week up. And that lasts for about 20 pounds or so. So every 20 pounds, you're going to either add 100 calories or subtract 100 calories from what you can have based on where your weight goes.
Oh, that's good. That's good math to hang on to.
And it's talking about it out loud can be a little complex, but I usually draw it out as a little graph because it's kind of a sliding graph. Essentially, there's a certain amount of calories that you can have. And as you lose, that becomes fewer calories, and it's easier to stay the same at that same number that you just were eating. And then when you eat more calories, now you have it's fewer calories that you can have to lose weight. So we have to kind of scale that back and forth based on how much you lose and how much you gain.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's good. That's good to better understand, I think. Are there early habits or warning signs that can lead to long-term weight gain if left unchecked? Things that make the path of least resistance less resistant? Lube it up, as it were?
So
it's a terrible way of saying that, but I'll take it.
Well, so all of it is patterns and habits. So you're not. It's another one of those questions where the answer is yeah, but because exercise really doesn't burn the same number of calories that the little machine in front of you tells you that it does. So like if you get on a treadmill and you run for 45 minutes and it says you burn 215 calories, these numbers are not like set in stone. That's why there's a range. That's why we say 300 up, 300 down. It's not a single number. So when you're doing exercise, if you're building the habit of being physically active, that's going to be great for your heart. It's going to be great for your lungs. It's going to be great for your cholesterol and your blood sugar. It's not really going to have a massive, massive impact on your weight in terms of big numbers of change, because the amount of calories that you're burning that are part of your substance is actually kind of low because of something called glycogen. So in our muscles and in our liver, we store sugar in a form called glycogen. And that is our reserve, if you will. And so when we exercise, we have about a 30 to 45 minute reserve. It depends on who you talk to and which textbook you read, but it's about a 30 to 45 minute reserve. And it's actually based on how much you eat in terms of carbohydrates and other things for storage as well. So that when you start exercising, you're burning that reserve. But the very first thing that our body does when we start digesting food is to prioritize refilling that reserve. So for the first 45 minutes that you exercise in any session, you're really just burning through something that you're going to put right back.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Unless you're exercising for about 2 hours a session, you're not really losing any weight from the exercise itself.
Okay, so when people go and they just pound at it for a half an hour real hard and then they go home and they're feeling pretty good about it, they didn't really do anything? I mean, they should feel good for a bunch of other reasons, right? But it's not...
But not about weight.
Yeah, it's not about weight.
It is not... It is going to make you healthier. It is going to increase lean muscle mass, which does eventually help with weight. It is going to improve your cardiovascular health and your lung health. It is a very good thing. 30 minutes, 5 days a week, excellent. There is nothing wrong with exercise as long as you are staying safe and doing it in a way that is keeping you healthy. However, it is not going to burn through your weight like they show on television.
Right. Those nice graphics of the red zones and everything.
That kind of stuff, but also just like, come to Planet Fitness.
Yeah.
We will help you lose weight. Yeah. Most of the time, not really. They're actually good studies that show when we first start exercising, we start gaining weight. Not in a bad way, but we're gaining lean muscle, and that weighs more than fat. So if you're getting on the scale and using the scale as your marker, and you're trying to exercise to lose weight, it's going to be very, very discouraging when you get on that scale and you weigh 5 pounds more 2 weeks after you started exercising.
Sure. My wallet loses weight. Does that count? Some of them more than others. Some of those places. Jeez. All right, we got. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, but building that habit is a good idea. So building the exercise habit is good. Just don't expect it to make you lose weight.
All right, it's good to know. Ozempic. Let's use the O word for a minute. Wegovy. There's others. What's the D one? The popular one? Demerner. Whatever it is.
So tirzepatide and semaglutide are the two like actual drugs.
Right.
So Wegovy is going to be the same as Ozempic.
Yeah.
And the tirzepatide is both Mounjaro and Zepbound.
Oh, Mounjaro's the one I was thinking of, which is not a D at all. Don't know why I did that. But these are being touted by a lot of people as miracle drugs for primarily the diabetic communities in our midst. But also have shown to create fairly rapid or sort of a quicker way to lose weight, potentially. Whenever that happens, I go, he's like fen again or something. It's going to be some weird thing down the road where they're going to outlaw the whole thing, and it was all a huge mistake, and anyone who has it now gets arrested or whatever. Are there any of those long-term consequences or any of that stuff in the world of these, semaglutides and whatnots? So far, anyway. It's early, right?
It's actually not. I'm going to be a broken record with this. Kind of is the answer. Those medicines, when used in the right context, can absolutely speed up weight loss. You still have to cut your calories, but they help with blocking the absorption of carbohydrates in the intestine. They're not blocking it entirely. You still absorb carbohydrate from your diet, and the more carbohydrate you eat, the more you're going to absorb, but they help us to cut down on how much we're actually absorbing. They also decrease appetite, so you're less likely to snack in between meals and take in excess calories that you don't need. Okay. That's how they work, and it's pretty straightforward. That class of drugs has been around since the early 2000s. The first drug in that class came out around 2003 when I was starting medical school. It's a drug called Byetta. And they are derived from a compound found in Gila monster spit. So there's your fun fact. Oh, that's right.
I heard this somewhere else and I didn't believe it. Confirmation. Yep. Well done, Gila monster. You did it.
So, but they've been around for 20 plus years at this point. That was kind of more my point. And so we have much more data than people realize about the consequences of using these medications. There are risks. There are a certain portion of the population that will develop pancreatitis or other damage to the intestinal tract. More commonly, if you continue to eat a fairly large volume of carbohydrate when you're taking the medicine, it can lead to things like diarrhea and bloating and a lot of just intestinal distress, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's a fairly common thing. And so there are sort of consequences of the medicine, and then there are long-term downstream effects that we have to be careful of.
I'm glad you brought this up. I have a friend who is doing Ozempic, not doing it. He's been prescribed Ozempic for his
using it appropriately.
Using it appropriately, exactly. He's diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and he's using it for that, and it's worked wonders in that regard for him. He tells me, I asked him at a recent thing we were together, and I said, you ate a lot tonight, and also he was drinking a lot and some other stuff, and I just thought, that's a lot. How are you doing that? And he goes, once I started Ozempic, it's never bothered me again. All my numbers stay the same. It's no big deal. And that didn't sit right with me. But I wasn't sure. I didn't know. So I guess I'll ask you. It seems like that's not the way you should probably. This friend's probably not listening, but if he is, I'm not using your name. But that doesn't seem like the right way to take this stuff. Right?
It's not as effective. You're kind of wasting your money, right? Yeah. You want the bang for your buck. And for it to be the most effective that it can be, you want to try to cut down on the total carbohydrate coming in. That way you're essentially putting yourself into a forced ketogenic diet when you're using these drugs. That's not exactly how it works. It's just kind of a generalization. But what's essentially happening is if you don't have glucose coming in through your intestine, you have to make it. And in order to make it, it is an energy inefficient process. So you have to break down fats and proteins, which means your net calorie intake actually goes down. You're using more energy to create the sugar, and it's not like negative calories, but it is absolutely decreasing the total that you're taking in. So if you're taking in a bunch of extra calories, that medicine really isn't doing as much to block how much you're absorbing as it could if you were taking in fewer carbohydrates.
What's the deal with quickly getting off of it, or getting on it, get you in some great numbers on your A1C, you're doing awesome, and you've lost weight, you're feeling good, and you're like, you know what, I think I can do this from now on. I've heard a lot of talk about how you get off of it and your appetite skyrockets. You're just like, oh my gosh, and you just go yo-yo right back into the top. Is that a problem?
It absolutely can be a problem, but it goes full circle back to the beginning of the conversation, which is it is about how you change the behaviors while you were taking it. If you are not working on decreasing your total calorie intake and decreasing your total carbohydrate intake, in addition to using the medicine, then the stopgap that is the medicine, when it goes away, you're still doing all of the behaviors that are leading to the outcome of having high blood sugar and increasing your weight.
Well, speaking of type 2 diabetes, I've heard you can reverse it. Unlike type 1 is, you're born with it. It's just kind of a thing, or you start young or
Remind
whatever.
me to come back to that in just a minute.
Oh, good.
Terms of type 1.
Good.
In terms of type 1.
All right.
But for type 2, can you reverse it? Yes, that is not a myth. Kind of.
Kind of.
You can become what's called a type 2 diabetic who is diet controlled. So type 2 diabetes is when your body makes its own insulin. It makes enough, but for lack of a better way to put it, you're ignoring it. The body cells don't have a place to put all that extra sugar. So when the insulin flood comes through, it doesn't trigger the same kind of responses because it can't. So the downstream effect of having all that extra sugar around is, have you ever had people coming over and you haven't cleaned for a while and you're opening closets and shoving stuff in it?
I have one of those moments right now. Tomorrow we got people coming here. I got to get this cleaned up. So I feel that like right now.
So that's essentially what the body is trying to do with that extra sugar. It's got to put it somewhere. And so it can form into things that are not going to be super healthy for us. So what we want to do is make ourselves more sensitive to the insulin and make it do the right things to break down the sugars and store them the right way and put them in the right places.
So resistance really is what you're talking about. Your body's resisting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance.
All right.
That's probably a better name for it, but we got stuck with this type 2 diabetes name from way back in olden times.
But if we get the bottom line though is if you're diagnosed with said diabetes type 2, you now have a permanent resistance. It's just now up to you to find a way, either through the help of these drugs or behavioral changes or a combination of both, you get to a place where you're diet controlling your body's reaction to its own natural insulin. That's the idea.
Absolutely.
And that can happen. Get you down. And that's the beauty of it. They got these numbers. I wish they let you do it at home A1C test. I've done the portable one for like insurance stuff.
Yeah.
They should just make it
They make a
available.
little machine. The problem, those machines are really expensive. It's not the machine, actually. It's kind of like razors. The cartridges for the machine are really expensive. The machine itself is cheap.
Oh, great. Thanks, HP. They ruined it for everybody.
Yep. It's the same model.
All right. This is a question that may or may not get, I don't know. It's going to get some interesting. We're going to get some interesting feedback on this one. What one nutritional myth or fad diet trend, or of your choosing? Oh wait, you wanted to get back to type 1 though. I didn't want to step over that. Let's go back to that.
That's all good. And I don't know if you guys have talked with Bobby about this or not on the other podcasts, but there was a recent study where they actually created insulin-producing cells in the pancreases of people that have type 1 diabetes. And essentially allowed their bodies to start re-regulating insulin production. We're in the fledgling stages of that kind of experiment, but there are at least 15 people on planet Earth who may or may not in the near future have been declared cured of type 1 diabetes. Dude. We may be living in the era when type 1 diabetes finds a cure. So that's breaking news. That's coming down the pike. We'll see what happens, but it is a very promising treatment.
That's great news. I can't wait for the pharma world to charge everybody too much for the potential of this.
Here's the cool part. It's not a pharma thing.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so pharma doesn't do that. This is when people talk about CRISPR and gene editing and all those other crazy things, this is a more of a gene therapy or a stem cell therapy, those types of things, more so than a pharmaceutical.
Okay, good, because they charge too much over there.
Agreed. Sometimes
CEOs,
they don't charge.
Well, maybe they don't charge enough in some cases, sure. But some of those CEOs, they got some nice yachts, is all I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Stupid Shkreli.
Shkreli ruining it for everybody.
Well, he's just a great example of how things can go horribly wrong.
Yeah, and he's an idiot, which helps.
That too.
All right, one nutritional myth or fad diet that you think does more harm than good in this world. Old or new,
Starvation.
even if it's starvation. Interesting. All right.
The idea that people can starve themselves into losing weight or to being healthy is a horrible idea. We have to have certain nutrients. We have to have certain things to keep our bodies going. And unless we develop a healthy relationship with food and how we eat it and how we take it in, and try hard to make sure that we're getting a diverse set of things. Now in the United States, we do fortify a lot of food, so a lot of our vitamins and minerals are coming through. Even things that aren't necessarily good food, you can still do okay and not become deficient in a lot of things. Right. But if you starve yourself, you're going to get deficiencies, you're going to have problems, and that is not a great way to lose weight. It is one of the worst and most harmful.
Does that smack up against the, what's it called, intermittent fasting people?
Kind of. Intermittent fasting only works because you don't have enough hours in the day to shovel food into your mouth to make you gain enough calories that you gain weight.
Yeah. Because I had
that's what intermittent fasting
my doctor is basically like, hey, don't eat after, if you can, don't eat after 7. And then, maybe get yourself to a place where you just got 2 good for you meals a day.
Yeah, that's fine. Or you could have 12 tiny meals a day. Honestly, our bodies don't care because we're averaging out across the whole day. Digestion takes 12 to 36 hours. It is not something that's happening within an hour or 2 after you eat. So how we eat and how we spread it across the day has very little bearing on how we absorb it and what happens. That's kind of one of those myths that is really, really wishy-washy and probably more culture than actual science.
You're like a cowboy gun shooter, just shooting these myths out of the sky one by one.
There are just so many of them.
Yeah.
There's so many people trying to make money off of this whole thing because people want to look good. And so because of that, there is just a lot of mythology around how to be healthy and how to have a healthy relationship with food.
Well, if you're at home and you're like, I got further questions about the way my diet's been presented to me by either my care provider or otherwise, or you just want to give some feedback about something we said today, or even if you have an issue, we like to have those too. That's fine. If you have a problem with what we've said, get on voicecast.app/medical. And the reason you're going to want to do that is you can send voicemails there. You can send texts there. Even if you want to have your text read in an AI voice, it'll let you do that if you want. It's a really cool way to do it. Super easy. Use your phone. Doesn't cost you a dime. You don't have to sign into anything. Just use it. It's a really cool service. So check it out. That's voicecast.app/medical. There's also a contact form on our website, themedical.show. That's right, themedical.show on any browser will get you there. And we hope you do, and we really hope you join our Discord at frogpants.com/Discord. You'll find the Medical Show Discord in there. Hang out in there. Ask your questions. Jerry's in there all the time. I noticed.
I try to be, yeah.
The good doctor is in. All right. I, on the other hand, don't check in as often as I should, but I have been. Anyway, I look forward to all your feedback about today's episode, and just kind of let us know where you're at with your diet, your little journey to lose some weight, or how happy you are with the way you are. And you know what? I'm jealous of people that can eat 4 pizzas and not have a high A1C. That's amazing. I want to be you. Maybe not. I don't know. No, I don't know what I'm. I don't know what I want. Most of them
are pretty rare. That's another myth that we'll get into in the future. This whole idea that eat what you want. There are very few people that can actually do that. So, we'll talk about that later.
When I could, I was 14.
Well, think about what you're building when you're 14.
Yeah, everything.
It's kind of like, it's exactly, you're building muscles, you're building bones, you're building all new structures that you've never had before. That requires a massive amount of mass and energy. And so you can eat calories all day long and you're going to use them.
Right.
Whereas once you're established as a 25-year-old human, you're not building all that stuff anymore. You are renewing things, so you need a certain amount, but it is nowhere near as much as you need as if you're trying to gain another foot in height.
Is that roughly the age where things slow or become kind of set?
It's a good solid number to say you're done, because some people are going to finish growing around 18, and there are other people that start finish growing around 21, or so 25 is a good safe place to say yeah.
That's about where, according to my sister, the psychologist, that is where they say the current science points out that around 25 is where your brain begins to settle into
cortex,
what it is.
Yeah.
Your frontal cortex. Yeah. You're no longer burning those early pathways that you do as a child or a teen. So I'm just saying, get ready, man. 25 comes fast. And then before you know it, you double that shiz. And then what do you got?
Halfway between us.
Half a box of Oreos is what I got. Anyway, we thank you all for watching, for listening. If you're on our YouTube, leave us comments over there as well. If you're listening only and you're like, wait, there's a video version of this? There absolutely is. If you go to youtube.com/ actually, the easiest way is just frogpants.tv. But we have it all linked on the website. So really the only place you need to remember is The Medical Show. Sorry, did it again. themedical.show. These vanity URLs, you got to get used to them. I think that's going to do it. Big thanks, by the way, to Eric Van Skyhawk for our theme music. Super, super appreciate it. And all of you for hanging out with us and being a part of this. Dr. Gerry, thanks again for a great episode.
Thanks for having me. Always glad to talk about this kind of stuff.
We'll be back next week with more for episode 3 of this first season. We'll see you then.
In the menu of life, make your main entree frogpants.com. It's delicious. Delicious.